Welcome back, everyone. The story of two almost identical girls born into different circumstances is depicted on a brand new float, Princess and the Pauper Barbie, furnished by Mattel.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm gonna be kind of biased about how I go about talking about this movie and how good I think it is. I was probably Mattel's ideal demographic when this movie first came out. I was a little girl, 3 years old, and I had a doll collection that took over most of my living room. And of course, my doll of choice was gonna be heavily influenced by the last movie or TV show that I watched. I don't remember being there when the movie first came out because I was 3, but rest assured I had most of the dolls, and it didn't stop me from watching the movie over and over again for years. It definitely served its purpose, which is primarily to sell dolls, but it did so much more than that. The makers of the Barbie movies understood that selling dolls wasn't just gonna happen because she was featured in some mediocre film. The Barbie movies, at least in my time, were quality, and none of them did it quite like Princess and the Pauper did. The movie has everything. It has a good story, a really good original music, one of the best villains in Barbie movie history, humor, and heart. If you don't remember it too well, let me refresh your memory in case it's been too many years or, God forbid, you've never seen this movie. The movie is pretty much an adaptation of Mark Twain's Prince and the Pauper. The two leads are Erica and Annalise, two girls who, like the original story, are completely identical but somehow not related. The only real difference is their hair. The fact that these two look so similar comes in handy when the princess gets kidnapped by the queen's royal vizier, who, by the way, is the best character in this entire movie. As a kid, I didn't think he was going to be so important, but looking back, he pretty much leads the show, but we'll get back to him. While Erica is covering for Annalise, she accidentally begins to fall in love with the king that was originally betrothed to the princess. I'm telling you, this movie had drama. Erica feels bad because she isn't being her true authentic self, and eventually she gets discovered and thrown in a dungeon, while Preminger makes a final attempt at the crown by trying to marry the queen, who now thinks her daughter is dead. Luckily, Annalise shows up right in time to stop the wedding, and her and Erica live happily ever after. Of course, I'm condensing, but if you want to delve deeper, you definitely should check it out. Animation-wise, it's definitely a little bit lacking in terms of other stuff coming out at the time, but they weren't really going for critical acclaim in that aspect anyway. These Barbie movies were straight to DVD, and like I said before, primarily meant to sell merchandise. As long as the movies were good enough to do that, then they were doing their job. And I don't really think something has to be gorgeous to tell a good story. Little kids create entire worlds with their dolls and imagination, and if anything, this is kind of just an extension of that. I always thought of Barbie movies as a template to work off of, and Barbie has definitely upped the quality in their animation over the years, so at the very least they're definitely working with the technology that they have. As for the story, I wasn't bored for a single second watching this movie. There's a ton of funny moments and a French horse that looks a little too much like Timothée Chalamet. Or is it Chalamet? I don't know. And for something made for children, there's a surprising lack of quote-unquote cringy dialogue. But the most important thing here is that it has heart. Despite the fact that these movies are made to sell dolls, we never get that feeling once in the film. The story is centered around our characters and their journey. It makes us care. And the way they make that happen is by giving us a world that feels real. Not once do I feel talked down to when rewatching this movie. I feel like we're on the same ride as the characters, not being spoon-fed the information. It holds up over time. It was rewatchable enough that I could keep putting the VCR back in for more. And if you want to make a kids movie even more memorable, in my opinion, you gotta throw some catchy songs in there. Princess and the Pauper is the first Barbie movie to be a full musical in which the characters sing their songs, and those songs are totally original. It's a huge reason so many of us that grew up with the movie still remember all of the songs word for word today. And they're good. These songs aren't just thrown in there for the sake of having some music. They're in there to move the story along and give the characters a means to express their feelings, what a good musical is supposed to do. These songs aren't repetitive and babyish, they're fun, smart, and catchy in a good way. So much so that they reused one of the songs in a later adaptation of the same story, which I never saw admittedly because I knew it would make me mad. It was never gonna live up to the original in my eyes. Look, I told you, I was gonna be a little biased. We even get an I Want song, which is usually characteristic of a Disney princess movie, but it's also common in musicals. And we also get the most memorable song from a villain in the Barbie Cinematic Universe. Speaking of Preminger, this is the part that I was really excited to get to. Everything I've talked about so far tells us why Princess and the Pauper is a good film, but here's what really sets it apart for me. It really speaks to a movie's favor when you have a good villain. Not all good movies have one. In fact, some of the best movies of all time don't, but if you are going to to throw a villain in the mix, then they might as well be good, and boy is this one good. Preminger is completely unbridled, hilarious, and still a serious threat to our protagonists. His entire being drives the story forward. You're not typically introduced to a villain before any other character in a princess movie, Barbie or otherwise, and typically we get to know the heroes first. And despite the fact that there is a prologue, Preminger is the first character we meet in person, and his song comes first, which is pretty unusual, and it's hilarious, by the way. I was really tempted to make a whole video about him, but I figured that'd be like way too niche. Maybe one day. Every moment he has on the screen, I was grinning eagerly for his next line, and when I glanced through the credits, I was surprised to find Martin Short as the voice behind this madman. Barbie movies don't tend to rely on bigger stars, but here he was, and thank God. His high squeaky voice, his mannerisms, it was so fun to see a villain be so unrestrained and yet not cliche or overdone at all. Sometimes in kids movies, you'll come across over-the-top villains that are evil for evil's sake, and their dramatics come across as eye-rolling and unbelievable. There's a fine line in creating a good villain, but they struck gold here. I'm honestly surprised this man hasn't become a meme of some sort, because he has that potential. The reason he's so important is because he's the one pushing the plot along, instead of taking the villain's usual place in thwarting the hero's quest. Annalise and Erica have dreams, but they're not really on their way to making that happen. If Preminger hadn't come along to try and kidnap Annalise, she probably would have ended up with King Dominic, and Erica would have sung at the castle, but there was no promise she'd end up getting to travel the world singing. Don't get me wrong, once he gets the ball rolling, he is the bad guy, and everything he does is now thwarting the heroes. But his motivations get the plot on its feet and moving. Annalise and Erica can't do much but react once it's started, but that's perfect for a movie directly made for small kids. It's relatable because as a child, you have dreams, but you can't really act on them, and you can only react to the world around you, not set the rules yourself. So it makes sense for the plot to be started by the bad guy. Annalise and Erica spend the first half of the movie just reacting accordingly to what's happening around them, and eventually fulfilling that dream that every child has, taking control of their narrative. At the end of the day, you could say that I'm overanalyzing something that's just a Barbie movie, but if we really thought that way, then every piece of media would just be a movie or just a musical. And for a movie to stay in little kids' consciousness well into adulthood, it just means something. It's still regarded today as a memorable and beloved movie. I can't name how many TikToks I've seen about it. Kids connected to this movie and saw themselves in it. It's no surprise one of the main themes was about being free. It's a fun movie that reflects that need to take control of your narrative, and I don't think it has to only relate to kids. It sticks with us as adults because it brings us back to a childhood of wonder and naive wishes. That, along with some killer bops, beautiful costumes, and this guy, what more could a kid ask for?